There's a lot of things I wish I knew about flexibility training before I started. It took me roughly 2 years of inconsistent training just to get to the splits, but if I knew what I know now, it wouldn't have taken nearly as long and I would have had much more fun doing it. So here is the fastest possible way to gain flexibility. If you implement this, you'll see results much faster than you would using any other method. But first, our sponsor. Just kidding. Well, I'm my own sponsor, but let's see how long I can hang from one hand. It's a little hot, but oh well. One of the biggest scams you see in the supplement industry is proprietary blends, which sounds like a good thing, but usually it's just an excuse to underdose ingredients. In Flexi Joints, we use the clinical dosage. Oh my God, it's very hot. The clinical trial dosage that they use in the studies. Oh, it hurts. Oh. Basically, they've done studies on the ingredients and we use the actual doses that those studies used rather than just some magic number. Man, that hurt. So if your rusty hinges need a little bit more, try Flexi Joints. Where was I? Oh yeah. There are many ways of gaining range of motion, but not all of them are fast or effective. There are two main categories of stretching. There is static and there is dynamic. Static means that there is no movement and dynamic means there is movement. Trying to kick your foot above your head is a good example of a dynamic stretch. And holding that same stretch but without moving is a good example of a static stretch. As simple as it sounds, it gets a little bit more complicated. The words dynamic and static are just the first half of the term. There are also stretches like this that are active stretches, which means my muscles are flexing as I'm stretching. And there are passive stretches like this that requires my tricep to relax while I stretch it. It's really fun because all you gotta do is pretend you're a toddler and smash the two words together. Am I moving? No, so it's static. Am I flexing? No, so it's passive. Static, passive. Am I moving? Yes. Am I flexing? Yes. So this is a dynamic active stretch, also known as a bicep curl. I forgot to mention that you don't have to stretch to your maximum range for it to be considered a stretch, but the muscle is lengthening, so it is considered a stretch, which is kind of funny because there are people out there dedicated to telling you stretching is bad for you, you need to do end range strength training instead, when the reality is it's all a form of stretching and there is no good evidence that any of it is bad for you at all. So now that you know what types of stretching there even are, the fastest way to gain flexibility according to this study is static stretching. Wait, no. According to this study, it's actually active stretching. Come on, guys. Latest research says PNF stretching is actually the best. As you can see, there is no real consensus here. And to top it all off, the studies done on the science of flexibility a lot of times are half-baked and have way too many confounding variables. Basically, they're not taking into account how intense they're stretching, the age of the person stretching, whether or not the person goes to the gym on a regular basis or is a Minecraft speedrunner. I was definitely the Minecraft speedrunner that barely went to the gym. But anyway, in my personal experience, passively stretching at a very high intensity like this leads to the fastest results by far. And it's also the most well-researched form of gaining range of motion. But if you don't want to be a floppy, lifeless, flexy noodle, you should probably do some form of active stretching, whether it be dynamic active or static active. The reason I'm such a firm believer in static passive stretching is because if you're doing any form of stretching correctly, it's going to make you very sore. You just cannot avoid it. It's like bodybuilding for your muscles, but lengthwise instead of widthwise. By the way, newer research is finding that you do get longitudinal hypertrophy, so it really is like bodybuilding, but for muscles lengthwise. Anyways, static passive stretching typically makes you less sore on average compared to the other forms of stretching, which allows you to keep stretching with a high intensity day after day. No other form of stretching could do that quite as effectively. So if you're just starting, static passive stretching is definitely the way to go, as long as you're stretching with a high intensity. But how do you know that you're stretching intense enough? Well, everybody has a different level of pain tolerance, so it's hard to say exactly where you should stop and how much is too painful. But it gets a little bit more complicated than even that. The more you stretch in general, the higher your pain tolerance tends to get. Let me say that again. Stretching increases your pain tolerance. Stretching is insanely cool. I don't get why people think it's bad for you. So the more advanced you get, the further you'll be able to push yourself with less pain over time. But don't push past your pain signals. That's where people get injured. You've been stretching for a month or two, you're starting to push further and further, you're feeling that pain, but you push yourself even further and oh! Now you you can't walk properly for 6 months. That's basically what happened to me. I attempted the middle splits, I didn't warm up, and I pushed past my pain signals and oop, wasn't good. After a couple months of rest, this was me. I wonder if I can still do the splits. Dang it, back to work. So be aware of the risks. The general guideline is avoid outright pain, but still stay in a healthy amount of discomfort. Okay, so 1, 2, oh, I'm gonna be so flexible. Yeah, intensity is important, but a 2-second stretch just isn't gonna cut it. So how long should you stretch? This study looked at 15 seconds, 30 seconds, and 60 seconds, and the results are surprising. All durations were effective at increasing range of motion, but 30 seconds outperformed both 15 seconds and 60 seconds by upwards of 10%. So now you know, 30 seconds is probably the best place to start. Keep in mind that the people in this study were not gymnasts, dancers, or flexibility coaches. They were normal people. So if you're more advanced in flexibility, don't count out those longer stretching times completely. But there's no question about it, 30 seconds is effective per stretch. But if you haven't realized it yet, stretching is a workout and you need to treat it as such. You wouldn't want to go to the gym and do 1 set of bicep curls and then just leave. The same principles apply to stretching. This review looked at 23 studies and they found that 5 minutes a week is the minimum effective dose, meaning the least amount that you can do to gain flexibility. You can obviously do 5 minutes in one go, but we just learned that 30 seconds is more effective than 60 seconds, which means it's also more effective than 5+ minutes. So that 5 minutes per week needs to be done in 30-second sets, which happens to be 10 sets a week. Which is kind of funny because 10 sets a week, most experts agree, is optimal for building muscle. Just goes to show we are bodybuilding, but for muscle length instead of width. Let's say your goal is to touch your toes. All you have to do is attempt to touch your toes for 30 seconds, rest for 30 seconds, and then attempt for another 30 seconds, and then you're done. If you do that 5 days a week, that's Monday to Friday, you hit the bare minimum, which is 10 sets. If you do more, it is gonna be more effective, but 10 sets is the minimum. And again, if you don't wanna be a lifeless floppy noodle, make at least half of those stretches active stretches where your muscles are flexing. I recommend picking 1 to 3 flexibility skills to work on at once, because if you do more than that, you're biting off more than you can chew. Besides, once you get a skill, it's almost ridiculously easy to maintain it compared to actually what it took to gain it. Recap, regular old stretching is the best place to start. Hold stretches for 30 seconds at a time, don't stretch into pain, and do 10 sets a week. If you need help finding the stretches, how many stretches to do, how long, what active stretches, what passive stretches to do, I have free ebooks on my website, stayflexy.co. You can check those out. And I actually have full-length courses coming soon, which will be linked when they come out. Stay flexy.